reality actually responds. What I learned from Outsmarting Reality by Nero Knowledge. Most of us believe reality responds to effort. If I try harder, things should change. If I want something badly enough, it should happen. If I'm a good person, life should reward me. Reading Outsmarting Reality challenged that. What I took from the book is this: reality doesn't respond to what you want, it responds to who you consistently are. That's a very different standard. The book uses the word frequency. You don't have to think of that in a mystical way. Think of it as your default setting. Your usual thoughts, your usual emotional reactions, your usual way of interpreting events. That baseline is what shapes outcomes. If that baseline doesn't change, your results rarely change. Not because reality is against you, but because patterns repeat themselves. One idea that stood out to me is what the book calls the old frequency. I interpret that as the old pattern you've practiced for years. The way you respond to stress, the way you interpret rejection, the way you talk to yourself when something goes wrong. You've rehearsed it so often that it feels like you. When you try to change, that pattern resists, not dramatically, but quietly. It pulls you back to what's familiar. The book's harder claim is this: you have to become stable in a new internal state before reality reflects it. Not after you see proof, but before. The book sometimes describes these patterns in strong language. I don't take them literally all the time. What I see is something simpler. Repeated thoughts become habits, habits shape perception, perception influences behavior. If you believe this never works out for me, you notice setbacks faster. You hesitate more. You confirm the belief, not magically, through repetition. Here's the structure in plain terms. You focus on something. That focus shapes how you feel shapes how you interpret situations, interpretation drives action, and action reinforces your default state. And then you call that outcome reality. The book's argument is that reality appears at the end of that chain. So if the internal pattern stays the same, the external pattern usually does too. This was the most practical lesson for me. Reaction is automatic. Something happens, you feel it, you express it, the old pattern resets. Response is different. There's a pause. You choose how to interpret what happened from the perspective of the person you're trying to become. That small pause is where change begins. Reaction strengthens the old frequency. Response stabilizes a new one. Another strong idea in the book: reality is neutral. It doesn't track how hard you tried. It doesn't reward sincerity. It doesn't punish you for being imperfect. It reflects what is consistently embodied. That doesn't mean morality doesn't matter socially. It means morality doesn't override patterns. Outcomes align with identity. The book reframes discipline in a way I found fairly useful, not as force, not as hype, but as internal reliability. If you tell yourself you'll do something and follow through, you build internal trust, conviction. If you don't, you weaken it. Over time, that consistency stabilizes who you are, and who you are shapes what you repeatedly experience. The loop is simple. Your state shapes perception, perception shapes behavior, and behavior reinforces your state. Most people try to change the outcome without changing the state. That's why effort alone feels exhausting. The leverage point is awareness at the moment you assign meaning to something. That's where the loop can shift. Notable is that many of the mechanisms described in Outsmarting Reality are not new discoveries. Attention shapes perception, repetition builds habits, emotion influences decision making. Psychology has explored these ideas for a while. What Nero Knowledge does is reframe them. He places responsibility back on internal consistency and treats these principles as causative, not just descriptive. The language can be strong, but underneath it is a clear message. Patterns produce outcomes. You can debate metaphysics, but the behavioral principle remains practical. Change the pattern, the experience changes. What I ultimately took from this book isn't that we control everything. It's that we are far more responsible for our repeated experiences than we like to admit. Reality doesn't need convincing, it reflects stability. So the real question becomes, what are you stabilizing every day? Because eventually, that's what shows up.